Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors, and I am thrilled to have back our favorite instructors, Jill Jones and Michelle Clark. How are you guys today?
Very good, thanks.
Good. We're going to be talking about feeding your bacterial partners, a science-based guide to energy and health. Now, I know Jill usually runs the presentation. I just want to share Michelle and Jill work very hard for several months in order to put these presentations together for you. So they're doing a lot of research, and I know how much everybody loves to hear what you have to say, and you make them fun. So thank you so much for being here today. You do have an online audience that's watching with you. And if you are watching from home, please feel free to put any questions into the chat and we will address them afterwards. I've gone ahead and put your PowerPoint up for you so that you can get started.
Oops. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out this morning. Has anybody heard the term eat the rainbow when you're talking about fruits and vegetables? Yeah, I guess we've all heard that, and for very good reason. It turns out every one of those colors represents thousands of phytochemicals that plants make that benefit our health. And this is a really hot topic in nutrition today. Phytochemicals, sometimes they're called phytonutrients. They're different than vitamins and minerals and fiber. They're special chemicals that are really beneficial for our health, and they know more and more about, they have identified more of them, and they know what they're doing for us. So they feed our bacterial partners, and they feed our cells. And in this presentation, what I'm going to do is show how the food we eat then gets transformed into energy for our cells. And here's the presentation outline. Every living thing on Earth, all life on Earth, traced back to a common ancestor of bacteria, a species of bacteria that lived 3.5 billion years ago. We still have some of their genes. We have about 300 of our genes can be traced back to these bacteria. So what I'm going to do is cover them, some key events in evolution that allowed us to come into existence. Fast forward to today, we have the bacteria now living inside of us and helping us. And we even have remnants of bacteria in our cells that are making energy. So we've come to depend on these bacterial partners to keep us healthy. And there's this complex conversation going on. What I mean by that, every bite of food you take sets off a cascade of chemical reactions, trillions of chemical reactions going on inside your body simultaneously, just for food, because food is energy. And so what I'll do is I'll walk through the process of digestion again with more emphasis on how that food gets transformed into cellular energy. Then the last half of the presentation is going to be all about food. First part is more about the science behind it, and the second part is different foods and what they do for our health. And I'll be defining some terms like what are phytochemicals? What about fermented foods? What are they? How does the fermentation process work? And also I'll give a better definition of ultra-processed foods. I have a little video clip that does it in 2 minutes, and you will all know when you see that. And then the last part will be where can we buy, how can we read labels so that we're not getting empty calories and we're getting more nutrient-dense foods, and some shopping tips and farmers markets and things like that. So Maya mentioned that Michelle and I do a lot of research. We meet here every week and for months, and then we look up information that relates to the topic we want to present. And here are the academic journals that we go to most frequently. And I don't know if you've heard of any of these, but they are ranked as the top academic journals out of about 12,000 in the world. So Nature especially is always ranked at the top. And this one, Nutrients, you may want to check that out because it's an online journal and it's free. It's on an open access model, they call it. It's free. And you can see all the studies and all the research that's very recent. These two in the middle, the Biobank, the UK Biobank, that's a database, medical records of 500,000 people that they've been collecting over 20 years. And the ages range from 20 to about 90 or something. They've been collecting their medical history, their lifestyle history, doing images of their brains, and they have all this information available through the years for these people, and they make it available to researchers around the world. So the research that's coming out now, a lot of them are using this as a database, and so it's not a study with 25 people. Now we can get information based on thousands of people. And you might have heard of the Framingham Heart Study. That began back in 1948, and it's still running. And it's sponsored by the National Institutes of Health and Boston University. And what they've been doing, they started collecting information, like I said, since 1948, 77 years. They started with 5,000 people. And they've continued to collect data on these people all those years, and their grandchildren and their children. And so they have an amazing data. And the whole reason it came about is because they wanted to identify the risk factors for heart disease. But now they use it for so much more. Here are some key events that happened in evolution that changed everything. These were evolutionary leaps about every billion years. And I've done it in a theme of energy, because a defining feature of life is an organism's ability to capture and use energy. And you use that energy to grow and to reproduce. Every living creature. And that's why viruses aren't considered life, is because they can't reproduce. They need to infect a cell or infect a bacteria or something in order to reproduce. But 4 billion years ago is when life first appeared on Earth. And they were, even before bacteria, they were primitive cells that learned how to convert minerals in the environment, and also even gases. They learned how to convert non-living materials into energy. Then about another billion years later, so anyway, these cells evolved into bacteria, and they continued evolving. And then bacteria appeared about 3 billion years ago that were able to use energy from the sun. They were living in oceans. At this point, all life was still in the oceans, and they were close to the surface of the ocean. They could capture the sun. They were called photosynthesizing bacteria. You could capture the sun, use it as energy, and then they started producing oxygen. Up to this point, there was no oxygen in the environment. It was methane and carbon dioxide and other gases. So they started putting oxygen. So that was new. Then, 2 billion years ago, another billion years passed, and there was an event that made our life possible. This single event in evolution, talk about a miracle. 2 cells merged. Everything up to this point was single cells and invisible. But at this time, because of this event, one larger cell ate one of these, a bacteria that used oxygen for energy. When it did that, then it was able to grow and multiply and start multicellular organisms started coming out. Then the last one here I have on another evolutionary leap. That's whenever animals developed a gut a way of digesting food internally. And that was, again, still underwater. It was one of the earlier animals was jellyfish. And prior to that, organisms were eating and capturing nutrients externally and absorbing them. Now they had the ability with the gut system, and bacteria started moving inside. So here we go. 4.5 billion years ago is when Earth was formed. And if you look at that picture, there's no water. It's all volcanoes, and the Earth was so hot at that time that it even melted rock. So this is all molten rock. That's what Earth looked like at the time. And it was being bombarded constantly with asteroids and everything. Then about another 500 million years, at about 4 billion years, then we started to see water appear on Earth and oceans appeared. And then it was primarily oceans. About 70% of the Earth was oceans. But that's when the earliest signs of life happened. And they were the earliest forms of life, these primitive cells, were deep in the ocean, and they were next to these, it's almost like an underground volcano in the ocean. These hyperthermal vents is what they're called. And what happened is they were able, that's when the cells started picking up minerals from these vents that were spewing off these gases and everything, and started to be able to reproduce. So at that time, about 3.8 billion years or so ago, what happened was our ancestor, our bacterial ancestor appeared. And it has a nickname, Luca, and Luca stands for the last universal common ancestor. It was down deep in the ocean in these hydrothermal vents that our ancestors, the first life on Earth, that we all trace back to. That's whenever they appeared. Oops, let me go back here. There is an updated journal that has information about Luca, last universal common ancestor, and how all of these events happened. This information was first discovered in 1957. So they knew about it, but as technology has improved and they've learned more and more in science, they've gotten more information and been able to clarify more and more, especially with genetic testing now, tracing the genes back. Now we're coming up to the type of bacteria, photosynthetic bacteria. So bacteria kept evolving. We're moving along the timeline now in evolution. And they're actually called green bacteria. The bacteria were a green color. They're the ones that started using the sun for energy and putting oxygen in the environment. They would later become chloroplasts in plants. So what was happening now around this time, about 2 billion years ago, oxygen started getting more and more into the atmosphere. And when oxygen appeared, all of these organisms that were alive at the time, most of them started dying off. It was a big extinction because they weren't used to oxygen. Oxygen was deadly to a lot of them. But there were a number of bacteria that were able to adapt and start using oxygen as energy. So these changes were taking place, and the certain bacteria, the aerobic bacteria, started using oxygen for energy. And the big event that happened at this time, they call it endosymbiosis. That's when one of these aerobic bacteria was engulfed by a giant cell. And these were called archaea at the time. Now we have archaea, which lives in extreme atmospheres, and they're bigger than bacteria. So one consumed another, Still, again, we're at the level where everything's invisible, but it consumed this oxygen-eating cell, and pretty soon the bacteria started making energy for the cell. So the host cell, that archaea, now was able to grow bigger. The more oxygen, because these bacteria inside of it were able to multiply. So they were reproducing, making more and more energy, getting oxygen from the environment, and they found a place to be protected from the environment. The host cell was now able to make more energy. And so that's what happened. And then they got so comfortable together with this relationship, the bacteria inside started giving away some of their genes. So there was this transfer. Now each of these individual bacteria probably had 2,000 or 3,000 genes. But then they started transferring those genes into the nucleus of the host cell. And they were giving up their genes, and the genes were becoming part of the host cell. So now they couldn't leave. They couldn't get out of there. They had to stay there. And the bigger cell became dependent on them. So you have the partnership here. These aerobic bacteria in there, they later would become what we know now as mitochondria. Has anybody heard that term, mitochondria? We have them in every single one of our cells. We have these mitochondria in our cells today. They have about 37 genes. They're these little organisms inside our cells, and they can reproduce. So they are the little organelles in our cell that give us our energy. That's why this event is important. And you see how it traces back to those original bacteria. At some point in evolution, a little bit later, one of those cells that had the mitochondria, it engulfed one of the types of bacteria that was photosynthetic. This particular bacteria, the green one, was able to use sunlight for energy. And it would later on become plants and then chloroplasts. So they would be making energy for plants. So photosynthetic bacteria became chloroplasts. And then what happened is, because the cells now, the plant cells and the animal cells, were able to make all of this energy, they started growing, dividing, and making multicellular organisms. So this is a transition point from when we went from single-celled organisms to multicellular organisms and complex life on Earth. Just to give you one picture to show how it all came together, started out with a large one of these primitive cells, archaea cells, engulfs a bacteria, then it goes off and was later become animal and fungi, and then another one of those went a different direction and consumed a photosynthetic bacteria, and then it eventually became a plant cell. And when you think about our energy systems, if you look at this picture, you'll notice them taking a bite of food. Every bite of food is driving all these chemical reactions in our body. Food is responsible for everything our body does, our heart, our lungs, everything. And in fact, I mentioned that our cells have mitochondria in them. They don't have just 2 or 3. The heart tissue alone in our bodies today, 40% of it is mitochondria. There are thousands of these mitochondria in a heart cell. There are thousands of mitochondria in a neuron in our brain. Thousands of them in kidneys. These all consume a lot of energy. They're the organs in our body that really use up the energy. And we can thank our friends the bacteria for that. Now, plants are a little bit different. They get most of their energy, about 70% of their energy, they're getting it from these, they get most of their energy from the chloroplasts, and that's what gives them their green color too. So they use chloroplasts for energy from the sunlight, but then sun's not out all the time. At nighttime, then they use their mitochondria to make energy. So this picture is just supposed to show that all life on Earth evolved from these bacteria, first with the mitochondria and then with the chloroplasts in the cell. So everything on Earth evolved this way. Some people call bacteria the original architects of energy. They really are responsible for how we capture energy and use it in our cells. They outweigh us by 1,001. There was a study that was done, in 2020. It was published in 2020. It was a really big study, took a long time. But it was MIT and a university in Israel wanted to look at the distribution of life on Earth. How many different species of animals and bacteria and every organism you could think of. And what they learned out of that is bacteria outweigh us 1,001. We just can't see them. And most of them are in the ground in the earth, but there are a lot of them out there. You can't really avoid them. But they're mostly beneficial or harmless, but only 1% of them are dangerous to us. Here's just a picture, the way biologists organize life, different life forms, different kingdoms. It's called the 3 domains of life. And if you look at this picture, this whole section over here was missing. It didn't exist because this is visible. All of this is invisible over here. And without those major events, you wouldn't even see that third arm there. And those are the kingdom, those branches are kingdoms of life. You can see at the bottom, the bacteria we call leuca, and then you have the first event, endosymbiotic event, where the 2 cells merged. And then this is where the chloroplasts came into the picture for plants, and everything evolved from that. The last part of evolution I'm going to talk about is another loop. And this is when our animals were able to consume food, digest food inside, consume it and digest it inside. And they were, that gut tubes had evolved. It was a simple tube at first, and jellyfish were part of the first I mentioned. And then it kept evolving, and we were evolving along with all of these organisms, fungi, bacteria, all these small single-cell organisms. And some of the bacteria and others moved inside of the animals at that time with the gut in there, because it turned out animals and us, we don't have the genes to digest our food. We don't have the genes to break down fiber, for instance. And we need to eat fiber to get the nutrients from it. But it's bacteria that gives us those genes. If you look at the human genome, we might have 17 for breaking down fiber. These bacteria, our gut microbiome, has 60,000 genes that help us with the digestion process. And we can, with that, and back in evolution, whenever they started moving inside of animals, that meant the animal was able to absorb nutrients quicker and more efficiently. When you're trying to do it on the outside, you lose a lot of the nutrients. So now we're able to get more nutrients inside the body, and the body sizes could grow, and different species could be evolving. But also bacteria inside did something else. They were highly adaptable. So it allowed different animals and people to move to different environments. A lot of times you'll hear, oh, our early ancestors, the cave people, they ate only meat or they ate only plants. Well, they ate what was available. That's the true story here. If and we were designed, humans were designed to do both, to be omnivores, to eat plants and animals. But some of the animals could only eat plants, like they're called herbivores, and cows are that type. So their digestion systems are set up a little bit differently than ours. We are able to digest proteins in a certain way, and we have the gut bacteria. But with cows, for instance, their bacteria are mostly in their stomach. They have a big stomach and a lot of bacteria in the stomach that are chewing up the grasses that they're eating. But that also made people, because those microbes in us were adaptable to the environment, it made people adaptable to their environment, and they were able to move around. And so if you pick up and move to Connecticut, you'll pick up Connecticut bacteria and give up some of your Tucson bacteria. That's kind of how it works. There's a lot of bacteria out there in nature. So to summarize this, it's a successful partnership. We view it as a successful partnership. We give all these microbes and bacteria a nice, comfortable place to live. We feed them, and they give us energy. But the thing about energy is we have a fixed amount. Does anybody know what limits the amount of energy we have? It's the number of our mitochondria, because it's a mitochondria in our cells making energy. And so if some of them have died off, or if we haven't fed them properly and they're unhealthy or they're damaged in any way, then we don't have as much energy. But with a proper diet and exercise is another one too, we can improve the health of our mitochondria. It's kind of like your bank account. If you keep taking money out of your bank account and don't put anything back, then you'll run out of money. So now we're going to move on to, how does it work? How does food nourish our body? What are the processes inside our body? And I thought I'd kick this off with a little 2-minute clip of he's a well-known researcher, and his name's Dr. David Katz. He was a professor of medicine at Yale, but he's also a researcher. He's written hundreds of papers and published books and everything. You might recognize him, but here's how he introduces the importance of food.
Food is the fuel that runs every aspect of the extraordinary human machine. And if you think about fuel in the tank of any machine, obviously the performance of the machine is highly dependent on the quality of the fuel. So that just makes sense. So there's that relationship, and that immediately starts to suggest that the quality of diet, which is our fuel, would be relevant to every function the extraordinary and massively complicated human machine has to perform. But there's more, because we're not just running on food, we're also manufacturing ourselves out of food. And that's particularly vivid when you think about a growing child. You see a child 1 year, and you see that same child the next year, and they've grown this much. Where did that extra Jill or Johnny come from? Well, it came from food and nowhere else. We literally are what we eat. It's not a direct translation. You don't eat French fries and turn into French fries, but you extract the nutrients from what you eat. Those become raw materials in the construction project of building a growing body of a child. And that growth comes directly from food. In the case of an adult, we're reconstituting ourselves on a regular basis, turning over hundreds of millions of cells, replacing spent hormones and enzymes. So food is both our fuel and our construction material. So it should then make sense that diet quality measured objectively is the single leading predictor variable for premature death from all causes in the United States today, and is the single leading predictor variable for the risk of all major chronic diseases. And what that means is if you get diet wrong, increased risk for all the bad stuff you don't want to have happen to you, a loss of years from life, a loss of life from years. And if you get diet right, it is the single most potent way to maximize years of life and life years. It's not the only thing that matters, but it's number one in terms of influence on both premature death and chronic disease.
Pretty powerful. I didn't realize the importance of food myself until I started doing these talks about gut microbiome about 5 years ago is when I first did it here with Michelle. Can't believe it's that long ago, but anyway, food is really important. It's what makes our cells. We grow our human parts out of food. Kind of amazing. But anyway, that's why one of the reasons we say eat a variety of plants is so we get those nutrients, a balance of nutrients from plants, and we get a variety. And there's different kinds of fiber. So we get all the different fibers when we're eating a variety of plants. And of course, fermented foods, I'll talk a little bit more about that. These are the guidelines that I'm going to walk through in a minute. We'll limit ultra-processed foods and limit antibiotics. In antibiotics, we have to take them if we have a disease or an illness, but the idea here is not take them too often and continuously, because they do kill off good bacteria. Phytochemicals. They are sometimes called jet fuel for our bacteria. And again, this is really new. It's really only in the last couple of years where there have been so many studies about what these particular phytochemicals do. They are antioxidants and anti-inflammatory. With antioxidants, what that means is whenever you're eating food, you're eating a meal, and your mitochondria are they're taking oxygen and taking your food and burning it for energy. Well, what happens when they're making energy, they're giving off waste products. And those waste products are in our cells, and we have natural enzymes that'll come in and neutralize the waste products. But if we're not eating a really healthy diet, there's a lot of waste in there. We've got a mess that needs cleaned up. And that's what I think of phytochemicals. They help clean up that mess, the byproducts from the process of making energy. So that's what they mean by antioxidants. This waste is sometimes called oxidative stress, or you might have heard the term free radicals. Well, these phytochemicals help neutralize those free radicals. And they also help bring down inflation, so they're anti-inflammatory. And I think of it in a way that it's more of a protection for us. All these thousands of chemicals, what they do is they protect us against cancer because they're antioxidants and anti-inflammatory. So nobody's going to eat a perfect diet. Very few people will eat a perfect diet. And when we're eating our cookies and cake and whatever, and maybe not having the perfect diet, if we're eating a whole huge variety of vegetables, we're getting this protection from these antioxidants. And they also boost our cellular energy. Why do plants make phytochemicals in the first place? These are chemicals that are protective to plants. They protect them from the ultraviolet sun. They make them to protect themselves from insects and enemies, from any infections. They make more and more chemicals. And they make them when they're under stress. When plants are under stress, they actually make more phytochemicals. So I'll just show you a little picture here of a little example. Let's say you've got strawberries in the patch, pretty healthy, in the morning sun, waiting for the sun to come up here. And then all of a sudden, you have these flies coming. They're the natural enemy of the strawberries. So they get all stressed out and start making chemicals and ward off these flies. So they don't get attacked, but they're making more chemicals, and that's really good for us. Here's a study you might want to look up. It describes it in detail how these phytochemicals, and again, you may see them called phytonutrients, but how they protect us against cancer and chronic diseases. Here's another one. When we're talking about eating a variety of plants, that includes spices and coffee and tea, anything that we consume from a plant. This study in particular in Nature was done recently, just this year, in May of this year it got published. But what they did is they took spices like cinnamon and turmeric and all these different spices and analyzed them for the numbers of phytochemicals, and they found that each spice had around 3,000 of these chemicals in them. Then they not only did that, they mapped them to specific diseases and specific health benefits. And so they had this huge mapping done where they could show how different spices helped with different diseases. So spice up your food. I actually put more cinnamon on things now and use more pepper and so forth. Fiber is another one that we want to get enough of, and I've presented this so many times, and you've probably heard a lot about it, why it's important. But fiber feeds our gut bacteria. That's what they need for food. And the different kinds of plants, different kind of fiber, that helps different kinds of bacteria grow in your gut, which is going to make different chemicals that'll be protective for us. It also helps manage weight because it's filling. Fiber is more filling. And it also slows down the process of digestion. So whatever you're eating, let's say you're eating some kind of meal like pasta or something that's high carbohydrate, but you happen to have something high fiber along with it, during that meal it'll be slowing down the whole process of digestion, and that sugar's not going to hit your bloodstream as fast. So it's better for blood sugar control and cholesterol. And just putting in a picture, here's what happens. When you consume all these different phytochemicals and fiber and fermented foods, goes down to the gut bacteria and then gets transformed. It gets transformed into thousands of different kind of chemicals. And there are a lot of compounds and chemicals in our bloodstream, these molecules, that have not yet been identified. And so they're still learning what's there, but they're finding so many more all the time that are beneficial for our health. And of course, that all goes to our cells and helps build energy. The idea here is because it depends on what your diet has been up to this point. You may or may not have the right gut bacteria to digest a lot of the fibers. So if you have not been eating a lot of fibers, the advice is to go slowly whenever you start out. Start eating slowly and then see how your body absorbs that, and see if you get any gas pains or anything, because sometimes they make gas whenever they're consuming a lot of fiber. But the recommendation is that many grams a day, but our average, what they're saying here is in the United States, we're not even getting half of what we should be getting, only 5% for men. And I don't know why women get more, but that's the statistics. Here's another article that you might want to look up on nutrients. It's about fermented food and the benefits of fermented food. Is there anybody not familiar with fermented foods? Okay, a few people. I'm going to go into the fermentation process, but for example, yogurt has bacteria in it. You might have heard of kefir, which is fermented milk. It just so happens that kefir has about 12 strains of bacteria, whereas yogurt has 1 or 2. So kefir has a lot of bacteria. And there are vegetables that are fermented you can buy. But what happens when you eat fermented food, you're getting live bacteria that will be populating your gut microbiome. And they may only stay there, it depends because they live in communities. They may only stay there for a day and then be flushed out. But if you continue to eat fermented food every day, you'll be getting more and more bacteria along with your gut microbiome that will be producing those good chemicals. Let me move on here. The process of fermentation, it's a really easy definition. It's just microorganisms, mostly bacteria and yeast, will convert carbohydrates in plants into other substances. And those other substances are acids like lactic acid and gases. It'll be converted into some gases and sometimes alcohol. But it's very simply, it's just these microscopic microbes, I'll call them microbes, are eating the sugar out of plants and turning them into other substances that are good for us. In this particular jar, you see carrots and cabbage and whatever. The other, what they're sitting in is a brine solution. It's a solution of salt water. And you can do this at home. I was going to try it, but I got scared because you're going to be making bacteria, and you have to have the exact proportion of salt to water and vegetables. So you have to weigh your salt, weigh your vegetables, weigh your water, and make sure it's in the right proportions in order to get the healthy bacteria to grow and prevent the unhealthy bacteria from growing. And it has to be free of oxygen, so you have to make sure they're covered and below the water line. They can't get any oxygen. But what happens, especially in vegetables, all plants have bacteria on board. They have bacteria that's part of them. They pick up bacteria from the soil. And then when you stimulate them with this solution, this salt, it gets them to grow and multiply. And what they're doing too is they start making those good chemicals. So when you eat fermented food, you're getting these live bacteria, but you're also getting the chemicals that they produce. And that's fairly recent. We used to think it was just the live bacteria, but you're also getting their chemicals. Now, if you think about what happens in your colon with the bacteria in there, it's kind of the same thing. Your colon is a fermentation tank. Any fiber you eat, any of these phytochemicals, they're getting fermented in your colon. So your colon is eating up, the bacteria are eating up the sugars out of the fiber and breaking down the fiber and producing all kinds of, I'm sure you've heard of short chain fatty acids. That's one of the really good chemicals, and there's bacteria, there are a lot of bacteria that make short chain fatty acids. They are ones that protect our gut lining, they protect us from getting leaky gut. They also protect our brain. They even bring down inflammation. They do a lot of good things for us. And so it's similar to jar fermentation, but it's happening in our colon. I just like this picture because it has such a variety. Because I used to think too, because the advice is to get 30 plants a week, a variety of 30 different plants a week. How can you do that? Well, I thought about it in my yogurt this morning. I had cinnamon and 3 different kinds of berries. So that was 4 plants right there. And then I had coffee, that was 5. And I had whole wheat toast, 6. So it adds up when you throw in spices and coffee and tea and everything. And this is how to recognize the fruits and vegetables, the produce that have the most phytochemicals, vitamins, and minerals in them. The ones that are the most colorful, if it's a deep, for instance, if it's a bell pepper, a deep red color, and it would have more phytochemicals than one that's just lighter. If it has a smell, if you pick up 2 lemons and one smells stronger, that's usually a sign that it has more phytochemicals. Also the taste. I don't know if you've noticed, but some lettuce that you pick up, like radicchio or arugula, it'll taste bitter. That bitterness is phytochemicals. It's preventing them from being attacked by their insects and enemies. A lot of places you can find, now, when you're buying produce, there's a difference between organic and inorganic, which you probably know. The idea with organic is that it comes from healthier soil. It has a lot of microbes in the soil that's giving the plant more nutrients. And in theory, organic food has more nutrients. But a lot of people aren't getting the organic certification. They're just growing healthy fruits and vegetables. So you have to think about that and know where you're shopping and talk to the growers and find out, because they may not have an organic label, but they have really healthy plants. Heirloom, I didn't know that term until a few years ago, but an heirloom, like an heirloom tomato or some kind of heirloom, what that means is it's non-GMO seeds, and it's the original features of the plant back generation after generation. It's the same plant back maybe 50 years ago. You're getting the same type of tomato. They've saved those seeds and passed them down generation to generation. And those are very nutritious. They're usually the sweetest that you can find. You might have been at my last presentation. I think I talked about the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. This is just a list that is put out that will tell you, you don't have to buy, well, for instance, we worry about, within organic, we'll worry about insecticides and stuff, and not fertilizers, but insecticides. But what happens with the Clean 15, those individual plants, fruits and vegetables over there on that picture, they produce so many phytochemicals that they don't need any insecticides, or they don't need any chemicals sprayed on them. So they're okay to buy without being organic. The Dirty Dozen, those are the ones that really absorb the insecticides, especially that one Roundup. They absorb it, and even after they're cleaned up, they are still showing a lot of these insecticides. You can't really wash it off. So that's why there's this distinction made between those two. And then this is not, the moral of our talk here is not to all become vegans. What we're saying is if you walk away with one thing, it's eat more plants. That's really the core message. Because we need proteins too, and a lot of people like animal products. I eat chicken and fish and everything, but the idea is to eat healthier animal products instead of highly processed. Some of the highly processed foods like bacon and sausages and things that are highly processed and comes in a wrapper usually are not as healthy. Grass-fed and grain-fed, you've probably heard that. The difference there, for instance, with cows and beef, the ones that eat more grain are typically and packed together tightly, and they're fed, and they are eating more grain, and they're not getting the diversity in the different grasses like grass-fed beef. So they're not as healthy. They're just not as healthy as beef that are fed more of the variety of grasses out on the range, able to roam around. It's just kind of like people. So you're getting a lot of fat with grain-fed. They produce more fat and make them bigger and weigh more. And that type of fat would be more saturated fat. Whereas the grain-fed animals, they'll have more of the good fat, which is omega-3 fats. Not as much as salmon, but they still don't have as much saturated fat, and that's why people talk about grass-fed and grain-fed. Now we're moving on to why ultra-processed foods are not good for us. And I have another little video that will help explain that, and she does a pretty good job. So, I'll get started. Oops. Oh, here's the definition. Well, yeah. I forgot my sequence here. Instead of all of these words, there are two things to remember when you want to know if it's ultra-processed. When you turn over the product and look at the label, and it has a lot of ingredients that you don't have back home in your pantry, or that you can't buy to make, that's number one. And number two, if it has to be made in a factory, if you can't make it at home, like Cheetos, you can't make it home. The kind of processes and the additives they use are only able to be made in a factory.
So instead of food, it's industrial ingredients that have been created through a series of industrial techniques. See what I'm saying? This is the problem. There's just not a lot of normal ass food in ultra-processed food. And group 4 is where we find our McDonald's apple pie. See, a homemade apple pie is only a level 3 food. Because yeah, it's got sugar, fat, whatever else. But it's really just a combination of regular old processed ingredients you find in any normal old grocery store. A McDonald's apple pie, on the other hand, is a group 4 ultra-processed food because it's made up of a ton of industrial ingredients created by a series of industrial techniques. And if we take a closer look at the ingredients of the apple pie, many of them are quite industrial sounding, which clues us into the fact that they must have been created through processes similar to pre-digesting, as mentioned in the article. Basic food crops such as corn, wheat, and potatoes are disassembled into their molecular parts, starchy flours, protein isolates, fats, and oils, or what manufacturers call slurries. The bulk of what is extracted is starch slurry, a milky mixture of starch and water, but we've also extracted proteins and fibers according to a video explanation of the process from starch. Roughly half of the starch slurry goes to produce starch-based sugars and other derivatives. Those are created by hydrolysis, a process similar to human digestion. Next, with the help of artificial colorings, flavorings, and glue-like emulsifiers, those slurries are then heated, pounded, shaped, or extruded into any food a manufacturer can dream up. So food manufacturers rip real foods apart down to a molecule, turn them into slurries of starches and sugars and whatever else, then combine these slurries and powders with oils and emulsifiers, and from there they can remodel them to seem exactly like the normal foods we know and love. Take potato chips, for example. When they were invented, they were just really thin slices of potatoes that were fried and then served. If you have an air fryer, you can easily make potato chips at home with just 3 ingredients: a potato, oil, and salt. But let's compare that to a Pringle. A plain Pringle contains fried potatoes, vegetable oil, corn flour, cornstarch, rice flour, sugars, maltodextrin, mono and diglycerides, salt, citric acid, and wheat starch. I actually thought it was going to be way worse than that, but this is a plain Pringle, so none of the seasoning is on. But let's investigate further. So to start, fried potatoes are likely not just whole ground potatoes, but an incredibly fine potato flake that is extracted in a similar process to what the article has been discussing. Then we have vegetable oil, which have you.
So does that give you an idea of what, you know, you'll never eat a Pringle again.
Or McDonald's apple pie.
I just checked my watch and I really got to speed it up here a little bit. I'll walk through this part real fast because this is kind of normal digestion where your enzymes in your mouth start breaking down food, then it travels down into the stomach, which is where digestive enzymes come out and acids and everything break the food down further, moves into the small intestine, and the small intestine is where the vitamins and minerals and nutrients get absorbed, and then any fiber moves down into the colon and gets eaten by the microbes in the colon, and then it leaves. But what happens when we have ultra-processed food? Well, first of all, you saw in that film that the nutrients are stripped out and the fiber gets stripped out. They're also removing those phytochemicals, and all of that gets extracted. And so it speeds up the whole process of digestion because if you notice, she used the word pre-digested, and I never thought of it that way. Your body doesn't have to do any work digesting these foods. And so it gets absorbed very quickly, just like sugars hit your bloodstream very quickly. This gets absorbed quickly into the small intestine, and then all the calories get absorbed. Now, what do I mean by that? When you have a lot of fiber, your body has to do some work during the digestion process, and it's burning up some of the calories. So when you have fiber, you're not actually getting all the calories of the fiber. And because it's pre-digested, it's bypassing the signals in our body that tell us we're full. That's why we think we haven't eaten very much and we want to eat more. And of course, they're engineered to want us to crave more. This is just an example with popcorn. If you look at these 3 cups of popcorn together, this is no salt or any fats added to it. This is air pop, 90 calories. Cheetos, 160 calories with the fat and oil in the processing. Now, during the digestive process, some of the calories are burned up with this popcorn due to the fiber, so they wind up being only 63 calories. I think this is the number one reason. It's right here. This is the core message of why we gain weight, because we're not getting a full feeling when we're eating a lot of the ultra-processed food. Studies have been done, and there are notorious food companies out there like Frito-Lay. They constructed potato chips that melt on your tongue. They dissolve in your tongue so you don't even know how many you've eaten. And then packaging for kids. This is a study that was documented where Kraft changed their packaging for their Lunchables, and they put characters on there that the kids recognize, and then they put healthy labels that the parents recognize. And in 6 months, their sales went up 20% after they did this new packaging. This is just showing what happens to kids' brains when there's all these they call it digital marketing now, digital advertising, where these kids' brains, 3 years old, 4 years old, they're just forming, and they're seeing all these advertisements with these characters. And then what happens, their brains are really learning this at a subconscious level. And then that carries through to us at adulthood, because it was all subconscious. We're not even aware of it. And so when you see the McDonald's brand, for instance, you might crave a hamburger and you don't even know why. But that's called the science of brand imprinting, and that's in your notes. So what is the best diet? It's really the best diet for most people. There are some people who have specialized diets, but for most people, over and over again, in all these studies and all those databases I told you with hundreds of thousands of people, and U.S. News and World Report ranks diets every year, this one comes out at the top because it's so flexible. It doesn't say you can't eat this, or it's not so restrictive. It's very flexible. And it includes just about everything except ultra-processed foods. It limits ultra-processed food. And here are just some examples of foods, overnight oats, and where you can get a lot of different plants and even fermented foods. Here's another one, a sample lunch. Mixed salads, this kind of looks like what I eat for lunch, but I'll usually have chicken on it or something. And a sample dinner. There are a lot of farmers markets around. You can look up a list. But I forgot to mention, and I want to mention, frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables are good too. They still have the phytonutrients and everything in them, just like you'd buy fresh. Because just like fish nowadays, these vegetables and fruits are frozen at the source. So these nutrients are protected. This happens to be, I don't know if any of you knew, I just learned about it this year, The university has a whole farm. They have a program called the Tucson Village Farm, and it's over at Roger and Campbell. And they have, they have twice?
Wednesday.
Oh, every Wednesday from 4 to 6. Yeah, they have a farmer's market, and you can buy what they grow there. And they have breads and soups and everything too. 4 to 6 every Wednesday. There's also, if you want to grow some herbs or vegetables or something at home and you don't have the space, there are community gardens around Tucson, and you have a list in your handout where you can go and you can rent a space. They provide all the education, they provide you the tools and everything you need. And then here are some tools that you can download. These are free, and they're little scanners you can put on your cell phone and go in the supermarket. And anything that has a barcode on it, any packaged food that has barcode, you can use that bottom one, and it'll tell you if it's healthy or not healthy, and it'll give you a list of the ingredients that are unhealthy. The top one is just for supplements like vitamins and minerals and some of these powders that we take. And here are the key messages. I won't rehash all of them. Just the last one, if you feed your microbes, if you feed those bugs in your body, then you will get more energy and maybe feel like dancing. That's all I have for today.
Thanks so much, Jill. That was fun. I had a couple of questions that came in that I wanted to ask. One was, you referenced kefir. Does that need to be raw kefir, or was it the pasteurized form?
It's fermented milk, and the way they make it is that milk's pasteurized, but then they add the microbes to it afterwards, and they let it ferment. So it kind of tastes like buttermilk to me.
Okay. Related to that, I actually had just heard recently about a super centenarian who just died. She was 117. I don't know if you saw the article or not. I guess part of what they attributed her health was yogurt. So she was eating yogurt three times a day.
Oh my gosh.
A lot of yogurt, but there were other factors as well, but that was one of them. And I know we talked about yogurt today. And I think you sort of answered this question. I love that you were able to share about the farm. Somebody asked if there was a favorite place to find easy and healthy recipes. And I think the farm does some of that too. And they're making a lot of different items. I think there's some hummus there and all sorts of things. And they do some cooking classes too.
Yeah.
So that was great. I want to thank you so much for being here today. This was packed full of great information for everyone. So I am going to wrap it up with our online audience, and I will turn it over to you for any questions in person. Thanks for being here, Jill. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again next week. On next week, we are going to be holding a class on cataracts, diagnosis, surgery, and interlocular lens selection. That is on Wednesday, October 8th at 4 p.m. with Brock Bakewell, Dr. Brock Bakewell with the Desert Eye Associates. If you are interested in that class, you can always give us a call. Our phone number is 520-324-1960. We'd be happy to get you registered. Or if you want to attend in person, you're welcome to register for that as well. Also next week, we've got emotional first aid after a diagnosis. What now? That'll be on Thursday, October 9th at 10 a.m. That is part of our survivorship series. Again, phone number is 520-324-1960. We hope to see you again soon. Thanks.